Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. In this one, you haven't guessed it already, we're taking a look at the Marui MWS platform. When I was filming the tracer video previously, this actually happened on me in that video, and basically the nozzle spring has broke. This can happen on a lot of MWSs, it's quite a common thing. However, today I'm going to show you how to fix it and how to get the upper receiver apart. As you'll see, the nozzle is locked outwards from the bolt, which means we can't split the upper receiver. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to pop the rear and front pins out, and a lot of the time what you can do is you can pull these two pins out, the upper will kink up slightly, like so, and then if you actually hit the forward assist and sort of point the receiver upwards, a lot of the time it will push the receiver out and you can get on with the repair. This is actually a good example because on this time it just did not want to let go. Now, if the spring has broken to the rear part of it, this normally works. However, on this nozzle, the spring had broken on the frontwards part of the assembly, meaning it had locked up the entire bolt. So no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it out using this method. So what you'll see me do here, I'm pointing the rifle downwards, and I'm just using a small screwdriver just to keep tapping the nozzle up. And what this will do is eventually the spring, the nozzle spring, will line up with the hole in the back of the bolt, and eventually it pops backwards like so. Hold it in place, drop the bolt forward, and just like that we can pop the receivers apart and get the bolt out for the repair. So we can pull the bolt out the rear as you normally would, and then we can get to this repair real quick now. It doesn't actually take long to do. The hardest part, if it is stuck, is getting the upper receiver split. Use one of those two methods. Don't try and force it, because if you do, you'll probably end up breaking something. And we'll take a look at this bolt now. The repair kit that I'm going to be using isn't the spring set from Dynamic Precision. They do a billet rear section, which I'm going to show you. And you'll see here, the nozzle just doesn't want to return. So we'll get to breaking this thing apart. It's dead simple. First of all, we're going to take a Phillips screwdriver and we're going to take the two screws off the top of the bolt section. Once you've done those two screws, we're going to angle that little plastic piece up. Be careful not to lose that spring. And then we're going to push that forward and off the bolt. After we've done that, there's a little plastic clip on the rear of the bolt which holds the rear pin in. Pop that up like so, and then you'll be able to pull the bits and pieces out. Now that's the plastic buffer that goes inside the spring, and this is where I found out that it was broken on the front, not the rear. And when we're trying to push the bolt forward, it's kinked that spring up because it was blocking the nozzle from retracting back into the bolt. So that buffer goes inside. That's to reduce spring noise. We do get a new one in the kit. I do try both of them and they still give a bit of spring twang once I put the new nozzle spring in, which I'll pick up a bit later on and show you what you can do to avoid that. Here's the set. So it's like a strengthened rear pin section, and you also get a nice aluminium piece that replaces the little assembly that holds the nozzle valve in place. So there's the new buffer and the old buffer. I do try them both, and eventually what I ended up doing was, I think it had the new buffer in there, and all you do, if you want to reduce the spring twang, if you've put it back in there, pull the bolt out, get some nice silicone grease, or I used something called Tech T Gun Salve. It comes in a little pot, it's a paintball product. Basically you just coat the spring in that grease and it will stop the resonance of the spring when it's retracting forwards and backwards. Usually with the springs I don't have an issue with the Marui buffers, but in this case it was giving a horrendous noise, which you'll see later on in the video. Just coated the spring in a bit of grease and it took that away. Now they do give you two pins in this kit. They are massively oversized for what they are, so if you have bought this specific kit from Dynamic Precision, what I suggest is use the pins off your old assembly. Don't try and attach the new pins, because I had a right game fitting these because they were just far too large for the holes, and it was a right pain in the backside. Ended up taking like 20-30 minutes to get them in there. So use the old pins. If you're just using the spring set and you're not replacing these other bits, you'll use the same pins and parts anyway. But we're just going to remove this screw on the nozzle. And we do get a new screw in the kit as well. All these parts that aren't broken I'm going to keep to one side. And we just want to try and push these parts out. It's actually the buffer ring here on the back section that's holding it in. So we're just going to pull that off. And then we're just trying to extract the valve and the little, can't quite remember the name for this part. It's basically just the little bracket that sits behind the valve, because we're going to put a nice aluminium one in there. Just because at the time I couldn't actually just get the nozzle spring kits. The only thing I could get my hands on the shelf was these, so that's what I'm using. And here you'll see the old plate there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to fast forward this bit here because it's just a pain in the arse me trying to fit these pins in the two sections here. But all you're going to do, if you are using this kit, take apart the old one, use them pins for this, because you'll have just an absolute game trying to get them in because they are oversized. So here's the new part. Just making sure everything's alright, there's no nasty burrs or anything on the parts, which they were quite well made apart from the pins. Here are the two pins, they are stuck together in the packaging. And these are probably 50% oversized for the holes. They didn't want to go in at all, but I brute forced them in there. You will see here there's a tiny bit of marring of this rubber, obviously, as the gun was cycling full auto. And these springs are more prone to breaking when you're running propane like I do. So this one's actually not too bad. I've ordered a new dynamic precision one. It's on the way. It's not here yet, obviously. But there's no reason this won't go in and work absolutely fine. And I've just pushed the assembly in and put in the new screw through the little aluminium plate that sits behind the nozzle valve. Sorry if I butcher some of these names. Just trying to get this all put together and finished. Just a small Phillips screwdriver there will get that seated. Try not to over tighten it as much as you can. You just want it nice and snug down so it's not going anywhere. And that's everything fitted. I've used the Marui buffer. I do revert back to using the dynamic precision buffer. And I also coat the spring in some Tech T Gun Sav grease. And this is just like a Tech T paintball grease. I like it because it's very high quality. I use it on a lot of the HPA stuff. It's what I had to hand at the time. Slathered it on the nozzle spring, and all the twanginess went away, which you will experience once this is back together. And I'm just pushing the nozzle in, making sure that little rear pin's seated, pulling it out with a little tool, and then pushing that plastic bracket in place to keep it in there. There's the spring twang. Just making sure everything sits properly. Everything seems to look okay. So now I'm going to put the top assembly back on. You basically just pull the nozzle out slightly and this just sits in at the front. You'll have to lift it up slightly at an angle to pull it back onto the bolt. And then what I tend to do is screw this in place first before I put the spring in, just because the spring can shoot across the room. It's happened more than a dozen times. I fixed quite a few of these nozzles and bolts, but honestly, just use whatever method's best and easiest for you. Just be aware that these springs do like to pop out. So I've popped the spring in the little slot at the top there, and I'm just using a small flathead just to push it onto the little stopper that holds it in place. I'm going to take the little Phillips screws, pop those back on, and once these are fitted, the bolt is fixed, ready to put back in the gun, and will function absolutely fine. I've had no issues with this kit. Like I say, and I hate to keep bringing it up, it was a bit twangy. You can even do it without having to pull the nozzle apart. Just pull the nozzle out of the bolt, pull the spring back, put a bit of grease around it, and you're good to go. So we're going to pop the gun back together now and give it a quick test. If I can manage to get this bolt together in my hand. If you're familiar with the MWS platform, I don't need to tell you how to suck eggs. This is all pretty straightforward. I'm going to pop this receiver back together. Do a couple of manual rack checks. Everything seems okay. Let's get a magazine and give it a quick test. Before we give it a test, let's just do a final check. Make sure the breech is clear, which it is. And just make sure this thing functions, especially with that rubber. Make sure there's no leakage. Nice and rapid. This will work for the MWS, Mark 18, MTR16, the whole Z line of products from Marui, and we'll see you in the next video.